He that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High, and is occupied in the meditation thereof, will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, and be occupied in prophecy. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And as always, it's a great honor to be here with you in fellowship and to seek out truth in the manner that we are able to do so and sharing this platform. It's a great blessing to be here also today with my good friend and author, Gary Wayne. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am, and so happy to be working with you again tonight, Zen, and very much looking forward to a stimulating conversation.
Likewise, it's always a good time when we get together, and we always seem to cover a lot of very pertinent information, and certainly the times are moving towards those things we've been speaking about for years now. And so it's good to get together in this manner with the topic of this show, and I'm looking forward to our discourse. But before we move into discussion, I do want to give you a chance to talk about the book you've already put out, and if you are working and getting closer to a new publication, where people can go to find your work, support you, any social media that you'd like to share.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. So my book is called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And the best way to get a hold of my book or to get a hold of me is through my website, which is the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And if you like some of the things if you're not familiar with me in terms of what I'm talking about tonight, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on the website, so you can get a good feel for whether or not it's the right book for you. You can get a hold of me and ask for some information on some things we might talk about, or ask a question through the website on Contact the Author. You can buy a signed copy from the website, and you can also link over to barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com and over to Kindle if you wanted to get the Kindle version. And it's also available on most online bookstores. And if you wanted to support your local bookstore, it's distributed by Bookmasters out of Pennsylvania. So you can easily have your local store order one in. And I really do like to see people support the local bookstores. And you can get a hold of me not only on the website, but the best way through social media is Facebook. I'm hoping to realign myself with social media. Things seem to be coming a little bit more clear. So Facebook, in the meantime, is the only one that I'm on right now, that I'm active on. And you can get a hold of me through Messenger or on my timeline.
And without a doubt, Gary is open to, sharing dialogue with the community. It's something that he has been doing with an AMA show that he does with my son Justin, and they just came on last night on Revolution Radio. And once a month, you can catch them. And if you do on the live stream, you can ask questions, and Gary will give you an answer directly.
Absolutely.
And, that's been a great blessing for the community, I know, and a lot of people really appreciate you making
yourself
lot of fun. Open to do that. I think so as well.
Sure. And I love to do that, and I love to take questions. So it's all about getting information out. And I forgot to mention, I am working on 2 books right now. One I've set aside. I'll hopefully get that one done after I complete the one that I've started this last year. It just seemed to be the right thing to do to put a sequel out to the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And I'm going to be calling it, I'm sure whoever I publish with is probably going to have some input on it. But right now, I think we're going to call it Prehistory and Prophecy. And the subtitle will be something to the effect of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And so one of the things I learned, I've learned, being on social media, being on other types of media and exchanging with people in the genre is that people want more information on how much is said about prehistory in the Bible, how much more is said about giants than what most people realize, and how does that connect to prophecy, and or does it at all? And I think it does. And I think if you want to really appreciate sort of the full context of prophecy, you have to understand prehistory, because the end time is just sort of the resolution to what happened in prehistory. And so all of the context and all of the allegories, for the most part, you're going to have to get out of prehistory and out of Israelite history if you're going to understand it properly. So the book is going to be quite detailed in terms of how much information there is on prehistory and the angelic order and giants, and how that intermixes with prophecy, not in a way that's going to show you the exact chronology of end-time prophecy, but just get you to understand the context of what is being talked about in the end times. So hoping to have that book ready for publication early in the year. I've already got 44 chapters done, and I've started on 45. They're not long chapters, but they're all sort of mini stories, kind of in the fashion that I did in the Genesis 6 conspiracy. But there's just so many topics that are related, and there's just so many names for giants, for example, in the Bible, that you have to sort of deal with them in either small groups or individually, depending on how important that they are, and then to tell about the giant wars that happened in the Exodus and how that all fits in. So those are the things I'm going to be talking about in the book, and all the way through is defining how that impacts and explains some of the terminology in end-time prophecy.
That's awesome. And, when we did a survey asking our listening audience what they wanted mostly to hear about, their reply was, about the pre-Adamites, the antediluvian age, the things that we talked about and covered in many different shows. And so is that also going to be part of your book, like the First World Age, the Atlantean mythologies, the destruction of, the earth in those times? Or
I have a lot of that in my first book. So if people are looking for that, this one is going to be focused heavily on the post-Diluvian giants and how they connect into the beast empires. But I have to get into the angelic rebellion. I have to get into the orders of the angels and explain the terminology that's being talked about in verses that will have words like powers and things like that, and principles and dominions, and why it's important to understand what are the invisible ones and what are the visible enemies that we're fighting at the same time, and connect all of that sort of in together by walking through post-Diluvian history on giants in Israel.
Awesome. And you also said in the, with the title of your first book, and the giant bloodlines and how they connect to the end of days and the war against humanity, how so relevant for the times that we are in, and also with the bloodlines of Cain and how they're sitting on the thrones of the world. Is this also a continuance and an elaboration on that?
Yeah, and I like to call it the spurious bloodlines. And if people look up that word, there's a couple of meanings, but there's one that is sort of explicit to the offspring. And that's why I like to call them the spurious ones. And yes, so I'll be definitely walking through and talking more about some of those bloodlines, and then how those bloodlines sort of interconnect into possible pedigree for the Antichrist, because I think the Antichrist is connected directly to the beast kingdoms, and we're told in prophecy that he will, depending on the allegory, whether it's, Daniel 2 or Daniel 7 or Daniel 8, he comes out of that series of prophetic empires as a horn, as a single horn coming up in Daniel 7, and Daniel 8, I'm sorry, is probably more accurate on that in terms of coming out of those beast empires. So those beast empires, as I'll walk through these individuals and the bloodlines and connected into the beast empires, it sort of follows that if the spirit of the Antichrist is there all of the time and has been from the beginning, that Michael is not necessarily holding back the beast empires from coming to power. He's holding back the ability to become the actual Antichrist when that empire comes along. So he goes and he fights, as the example we get in Daniel, against Persia, and then he's going to go fight against Greece. And it's really important to understand Greece because that's where you get more information out of the Old Testament about the future Antichrist and some very, very important allegories and information that comes out of there. So so I think people will be quite happy that the themes are going to be very, very consistent. I wanted to write a book that wasn't going to be just more of the same from what I wrote in the first book, and I wanted it to be essentially as much new information as I could, understanding I still got to build some bridges and stuff and things like that, so that people aren't sort of saying, well, where did that come from? Or how did he get there with that sort of understanding? So it's designed not to be redundant, but to provide an incredible amount of information.
Well, I know that a lot of people have been looking forward to a new release from you, and the first book that you put out certainly contained an extensive amount of information, and certainly gave people a lot to digest in researching and examining the topic of giants and the war in heaven and the connections, the enmity, all of that, and how it's played out. Going into the topic of discussion for this evening, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on Russia and the Ukraine, and also China and Taiwan. Gary, there.
It's a very good point and question. And as we talk about birth pangs with end time in terms of what that sort of means, and we get 4 listed and perhaps 1 in Luke as well with the roaring of the seas, but you get wars and rumors of war, and you get pestilence, and you get famines, and you get earthquakes.
Right.
And you see this sort of jostling that is starting to become more evident in terms of what China is really looking to do and what Russia is really looking to do. It's not that they're against the Nephilim world order, as I like to call it, instead of the New World Order. It's that they want a more important role. And just as President Trump wanted America to have a more important role than, let's say, perhaps what the Europeans were wanting the U.S. to have, that's the same sort of principle that's going on in China and Russia today. And so they're looking for the opportunity to expand their sphere of influence, their empire, so to speak. If we look at end time, you look at the world being divided into 10 empires. And these are 10 kings that are going to step forward, that are going to have a world empire that is going to be made up of trading blocks or spheres of influence. And that's what they're going to be moving towards to reestablish. And so if you follow what Putin is doing, he wants to re-annex the Ukraine back into the Scythian Russian historical empire. And the original czars for what we would know as Russia today and the Russian Empire settled in the Ukraine, Kiev area. And what's interesting is Putin, his name comes out of nowhere in about the 1850s with his grandfather. No history of that name before. But typically what happened in the aristocracy, particularly with the pure bloodlines of the czars, is that if there was a extramarital marriage, not a marriage, I'm sorry, an affair, and a baby was born out of wedlock through that, they wouldn't give that individual, that baby, the full name, but they would give it part of a name. And the pure bloodline of the czars, that was before the Romanovs, that remained in the Ukraine area as part of the Cossacks and that whole sort of mix of the early czars, was the Putyanin, which was still a noble bloodline even after the Romanovs took power in Rome, and I think probably early 1600s when the Romanovs would have taken part of that. And so Putin is thought to be part of that name. So he has this noble blood, but only partly so, because we're not sure how the affair that name would have, it came out of from the female perspective, wouldn't have been certainly as pure blood as the Putyanin. And so that's why he's fixated on taking the Ukraine. And he's going to take that as fast as he can. It's just something he is going to do, and is just looking for a weak enough leadership to make that happen. So I'm not a prophet on these things, but I think as we get by the Olympics this following year in the winter, look for things to move fairly quickly. And you can also look at President Xi coming out of the Shah dynasty bloodlines. That comes from the dragon creators who produced all of the dynasties throughout Chinese history, except as they would have been interrupted for a brief period from the Mongol Empire. But those bloodlines of the Shah dynasty remained in place, and all of those dynasties were direct bloodlines out of the dragon blood, out of the dragon gods after the flood and before the flood, that continued. And that's where Z, X-I as we would spell it in English, comes out of Xia, which is Z-I, not Z, X-I-A. And that is part of the Western part of the Li bloodline that people might be more familiar with. But it's part of that original bloodline. And it's no surprise then, and as we look at around on events this year, that we have this individual that has these bloodlines that has now declared himself, we'll see whether he can carry it out and hold on to it, but basically as president for life. And so he's going to move, and he said he would do it in his reign. He's going to take Taiwan. So we need to understand that these two individuals are following a course of action that they feel compelled from their history and their bloodlines that come from the gods and the Nephilim and or the Rephaim after the flood to do this. This is all in preparation for the end time. So we should be watching these sort of happenings that are taking place, and I don't think is it going to come without war. There's going to be wars that are involved on there, and all of this is going to bring about the ability to bring about the 10 King Empire for the end time. But we're going to need to see another force called Babylon that would have to come on the earth scene beforehand to sort of settle things down and be the glue that brings the world together.
Fascinating. And I do believe that you are correct in the way that it is positioning us for the movement into prophecy in the end times as revealed within the scriptures. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and allow you to guide the discussion and to lead us into what you have prepared for the evening.
Sure, and feel free to jump in anytime, because we can go in a lot of different directions with this. And so again, as we're watching things that we didn't think could happen the way that they're happening in our lifetime, even though we may all be buffs of prophecy, it's rather shocking to watch things unfold before our eyes, and how those things sort of unfold. And so I'm going to begin not with the birth pangs, but with two overarching signs that Jesus tops off the discussion with the disciples who have come to him and asked and said, what will be the sign of your coming, and what will be the sign of the end time? And they wanted to know explicit details so they could be on watch for it, because they kind of thought he'd come back sooner than later. And so those two overarching signs we have to be using in conjunction with the birth pangs that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And the first one is the fig tree generation.
Yes.
And that this generation will not pass until all the things that he had predicted happen. And not in some sort of disarrayed manner, some sort of confused, sort of topical kind of manner, but in the exact way the Word of God said it would happen. And in my understanding of prophecy, I don't fall into the category that the order that Jesus put it in isn't the right order. He gave us the right order, and he supplements the signs that are governed by the overarching signs in a way that says, and then this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens. And those words aren't inserted by the translators for the most part. Like, then essentially when you see the word then in the signs, that's the Greek word tot. And so then goes back to a specific word, so it's not inserted. He used it for a purpose so that you could understand the chronology. And that's Greek word tot means then, at that time, thereafter, or when. And so when you see then being used there, that then this happens and then that happens, then you know that there's a chronology that he's giving us. And then he puts in the middle of the oration the abomination. And then he recommends that we look up and become familiar with and reference the book of Daniel and Daniel the prophet, and the abomination that he's talking about in the timing. And so if you use this chronology that Jesus provides, and that's in the middle, and then what happens after that, you get the word then again, and you get the chronology that's happening after the midpoint. If you use the chronology that Jesus provides, you can overlay all the other prophecies around what he said. And in my approach, I don't apologize for what Jesus said, and I don't try and rewrite what Jesus said, and I place all other prophecy around Jesus said because he's the authority. And when you do that, everything starts to make sense. And so with the fig tree generation, that is one of the overarching ones. And all of the events that he has laid out in the order that he laid out are going to happen exactly as he said, that, the world will pass away, but his words will never pass away. I mean, he's quite firm on this, is quite literal and accurate, and you better pay attention to this. So we don't know exactly when that fig tree generation starts, but we get some indications. And in the language, you have the fig tree.
Yes.
And the fig tree is, in the Old Testament, kind of refers as an allegory, in prophetic allegory, to the southern kingdom of Judah. The vine will apply to the northern kingdom. And sometimes you might see them mixed together, but understand when it's referring to Judah as the fig tree, that's part of what Jesus is relying on for your understanding of this. And then in Matthew 21, you have him going up to a fig tree and causing it to die. And then thereafter, he starts to talk about how Judah in Jerusalem is going to be overthrown. And It's this fig tree that when you see it bloom again, you'll know what the seasons are, and you need to judge that end time by when the fig tree reblooms. And so we have a couple of choices if we are indeed in the fig tree generation. And I think more and more likely it seems that we are, is that the first thing that you would have to have is you'd have to have the visible southern kingdom or parts of those people back in the covenant land, just as in the Gog War or Joel 1 and 2. For example, in the Old Testament, you've got a war that's going on with Israel that is in the covenant land. So Israel has to be there.
Hold on, Gary. We'll be right back, everyone, for a second.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Check out swpcalendar.com to see when to join us next for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
And ye, take ye the likeness thereof. Learn a parable from the fig tree. So soon as the shoot thereof is come forth, and the twigs grown, the end of the world shall come. And I, Peter, answered and said unto him, Interpret unto me concerning the fig tree, whereby we shall perceive it. For throughout all its days does the fig tree send forth shoots, and every year it bringeth forth its fruit for its master. What then meaneth the parable of the fig tree? We know it not. And the master Lord answered and said unto me, Understandest thou not that the fig tree is the house of Israel? Gary?
Exactly. And so I think we get that defined rather succinctly in the passage that you just read. And I would also say that we get 2 points with visible Judah being in the covenant land as being one that, they declared their independence in 1947, but fought the independence war in 1948. But I think more importantly is the taking of Jerusalem, because that happens in 1967, and all prophecy, end time prophecy, seems to center around Jerusalem being in Judah's hands in the end time. So I think if we could look towards a starting point for that generation, I would look for that, because the fig tree has taken root back in Jerusalem, where Jesus killed the fig tree. And it's important to understand that we don't know how long a generation is. We get a number of choices in the Bible. In the book of Numbers during the Exodus, it's a generation was 40 years. That generation was not going to go into the covenant land for the rebellion. Genesis, not in Genesis, but in Psalms 70, you get a generation is 70 years. And then Genesis 6:3, you get a lifetime is going to be limited thereafter to 120 years. So we get a number of references as to how long is that generation. And we're not told that that whole generation has to be fulfilled in those number of the years. So if we start to look at that, then 40 years is a little bit more problematic, but 70 or 120 years is still in play, that we could be in the fig tree generation, and there's still some time there to bring things together. And when we look over and survey what's going on in the world, things are coming together in a geopolitical fashion and a political fashion, but we're not there yet. So there's a little bit more time for this to come together for sure. And then the other overarching sign is as in the days of Noah, with Luke linking that to also the days of Lot. And those days of Noah that Jesus is talking about there is the same days of Noah that comes out of Genesis 9:29, where his days were 600 years before the flood and 350 after the flood. And he would have known the exact words, even though we're getting this translation out of Greek into English, and Genesis is Hebrew into English. The words are exact, but you would expect that from the Word of God, who's the Spirit of prophecy that he's called in Revelation 19. You would expect it to be accurate, just as you get the same references and the same expression in the days of Noah that's talked about in 1st and 2nd Peter, when it's talking about the crimes before the flood and the crimes of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's why it's important to understand that Luke linked it as being both, because Noah lived both before and after the flood. So we need to understand both sides of Noah's lifetime. And that's the other overarching understanding of what happened in those days and why it comes at the end and not in the chronological order, because we have to understand everything that was going on, because it's that there's nothing new under the sun idiom that comes out of the book of Proverbs or Ecclesiastics. I'm sorry, I mixed the books up. Ecclesiastics, and that what has been will be again, because there's nothing new under the sun. And that we've had an apocalypse. We get the reference to what happened in the apocalypse by water, and Luke links us as Sodom was destroyed, so the end time is going to be destroyed by it. So we need to understand that and everything that happened in those lifetimes, which is why we need to understand prehistory and why I was talking about that earlier in the show. And we need to understand that in context to what Jesus talks about at the beginning of the oration in terms of the events that the disciples are looking for Jesus to be very, very specific on. And, he begins with saying, take heed that nobody deceives you.
Yes.
So you need to understand that he's placing huge influence on what he's about to say. And that deception will be absolutely astounding, particularly as we get to the end time, in a way that we still can't imagine how difficult it's going to be, with the great delusion, and even the elect are going to be deceived if that were possible. So we're going to have to be very careful as to who we're listening to and who's grounded in prehistory and prophecy. And the trouble is with churches today, they're not. Right. And they're not taught prehistory and prophecy, so they're not going to be preparing the flock for what is coming. And it's so terrible, we ought not to want to be part of it. But if we are going to be part of it, we need to be putting on all the armor so we understand it. So after Jesus said that, do not be deceived, understand that there's going to be many coming in Christ's name. So there's going to be multiple Christ, multiple Antichrist. And also we're going to hear about Antichrist in plural further on into his signs, but also in the epistles of John, we're told about multiple Antichrists. So we can't be just pointing at the first one that comes along, because there's going to be several of them coming from probably all around the world, because there can only be one family that's going to set up the dynasty from the polytheist perspective. And so we're going to see a lot of wannabes that sort of come along. But then Jesus gets into the birth pangs, which are wars and rumors of war and pestilence and famine and earthquakes. And as Luke talks about the roaring seas, I would sort of put that in, although it's not sort of in those birth pangs. But what's important to understand is the understanding of the birth pangs, as I call it, or the beginnings of sorrows. And as you take that allegory back to the Old Testament, you find out sorrows is the pregnancy and, having birth, and the pains and the travail pains that take place through that birth process that everybody is aware of. And those pains will get stronger and quicken as you get through the fig tree generation. So we can expect all of these things to be not only working in tandem, but getting stronger. And so much so that by the time you get to the opening of the seals in Revelation 6, 25% of the people will be killed in those seal judgments, and 25% of all of the earth, and then 33% with the trumpets. And then all the earth would be destroyed with the bowl judgments and the bowl catastrophes if Jesus didn't step in to prevent it. And he clearly says that all flesh, all life would be killed if he didn't come back in and shorten those days. And so we need to look at these things working together. And in the birth pangs getting stronger, they will also be, I think, and this is my sort of understanding, is how I look at the catastrophes and what happens in the end time, is these are man-made or man-assisted catastrophes. That whether or not it's a famine or it's a war or it's a pestilence or it is earthquakes, that these are what I call contrived catastrophes. And it's going to make some sense that that's going to be the case. They want to bring on the day of destiny to have this out with God. That's the end agenda. But B is that there's going to be many false prophets. And the false prophets are going to have to be believed. So if they're going to predict prophecies of doom, to convert everybody into this universal religion, this mystical religion that is coming, they're going to have some sort of way of ensuring that those catastrophes are going to happen and when they're going to happen. But they're still called biblically a false prophet because it's not a true prophecy of the future of something that is out of that individual's control or knowledge to have control over. So I would be looking for false prophets that will continue with what seeds have been planted with the apocalyptic prophecies of the knowledge cult that's out there today, that if you don't stop greenhouse gases, then we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the earth. If we don't control population, we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the earth. If we don't, everything, whether it's from atomic weapons to anything that's going on in the world today, has been raised to that apocalyptic nature to try and scare people into the people causing, the arms of the people who are causing the trouble, who will present a solution that will only make things worse. And so when we look at these birth pangs getting stronger, also look for them to work together. And so, you know, we've seen some things that have happened with pestilence over the last 20 years, but the latest has been the most concerning and the most long-lasting. And I'm here to say that this is just the beginning. And then when we're talking about contrived catastrophes, we don't know the source of this last catastrophe. We pretty much do, but it's not natural, right? So we have this catastrophe that has taken over the world that fits perfectly in to the birth pangs. And you even get somebody in the knowledge cult that in 2017 in January, stating when President Trump took over, is that he essentially guaranteed President Trump's term, his first term, would not make through the whole 4 years before they had a pandemic that the whole world and the presidency would have to take notice of and deal with in a way that's not been done before. And so, and I don't think he is one of these false prophets that are being talked about. I think this is a whole nother class of false prophets that we need to be starting to become more aware of. But I thought I'd let you in there because I did cover a lot of territory.
Yeah, I've got some really relevant questions. First, I wanted to ask you about what you thought as far as the Georgia Guidestones, the thing to maintain humanity under 500,000, the whole thing of guiding reproduction wisely, you know, all these what seem to be noble ideas, but we know that there's a sinister agenda behind it, the balance personal rights with social duties, these kind of things. And then I also wanted to ask you about Albert Pike and how he spoke about that, you know, there being this Third World War, and then there would be the revealing of the Antichrist, and that they would bring forth this social cataclysm, and then they, you know, out of all of that, the order out of chaos. It says then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view.
Yeah, very, very good questions and points. And let's begin with the first point about how the forces that control the world look at humans as being mundane, that we are not as worthy. And so always what's part of fascism and genocide is the reduction of a certain people or race to a lower level of being, and they raise themselves up as being superior spurious bloodlines from the fallen angels and the Rephaim and the Nephilim in their belief system, and have the genealogies to produce and prove it. So they say whether or not they're legitimate or not, they certainly believe it, and that's the thing we need to understand and what they're doing with that belief. And they also believe that much of their seed is dispersed around the world. So when they talk about 1,000 points of light, that's the spark of the divine, the spark of the counterfeit spirit that they like to talk about in their flowery language on the New World Order. So they're trying to bring that spark of their offspring back together. And that it's also why they're interested in genealogies or genes, because it's that gene of Isis that they're also trying to identify that would produce, if there is a connection to the Rh negative bloodline, and I think there probably is, but it would be the gene that would produce the Rh negative. The Rh negative isn't inserted, it comes from the genes, which is the gene of Isis as they believe. And they're trying to find through all the databases, whether it's on blood or genealogies or DNA, all the people that they would want to have in this new age, in this new Atlantis of 10 kings, just as Atlantis had 10 kings and was understood as the helm of world government and the great society in the first time before the flood. That all had Nephilim kings because they're the offspring of a human female and Poseidon that were the kings. So it's the same story that's being talked about in Genesis 6, 1 through 4.
Right.
And so they only want enough humans for sacrifice, likely, or for slavery, or both, right? They just want servitude. So they're looking for who they want to qualify. So they don't really care how many humans will be lost in this process. They're going to make sure that they're protected and that they're going to be the ones that are going to take over in this new age. So they don't mind all of these catastrophes. And one would presume that they would have protection as well from various kinds of the catastrophes. So I think that is something we need to be aware of. And these are the same forces that are the globalists that, put up the Georgia Guidestone. So 500 million is kind of their ideal number all around the world. And that's a significant loss of people that they're prepared to make happen. And now when you sort of roll that into with what Albert Pike was talking about this World War III, this is not unknown biblically. This is quite well understood. And just as he was talking about that there needs to be this war, that chaos will be eliminated and replaced with peace and safety in this new future, this new age ruled over by their dragon Messiah, this is understood quite well through prophecy and warnings in the Bible. So when we look at what is he talking about in World War III as how that would fit with end time prophecy, we need to look at what is happening in Revelation 9 with the release of the fallen angels, which are the ones who created the Nephilim with their violations against the law of creation, and probably the worst of the fallen angels, and the ones who did horrible things to humans. And so all the ones who created crimes against humanity would have been in there. There's other beings that are coming out with them. I don't want to get down that rabbit trail, but at the end of Revelation 9, you get into what everybody generally thinks in end time prophecy is the Armageddon army of 200 million people, because it's so huge. And you get all of these strange creatures in this army that are slightly different than the descriptions of the creatures coming out of the abyss. And I think these are very high-tech biological weapons that are being developed, some sort of transhumanism, some sort of advanced technology that we don't have, but it is part of that army. This is the same description that is going on in Joel 1 and Joel 2. And and you could say that in Joel 3 as well, but Joel 1 and 2 is not Armageddon. The day of the Lord is near, but it's not at hand there as it is in Joel 3. Those are two separate wars. Joel 1 and 2 is matching up identically with Revelation 9. And I think this is the Ezekiel 38 and 39 Gog-Magog war that will produce this great alliance. And it will be of such huge army, not seen since the beginning of time. Just as Joel 1 and 2 talks about this great army, I think this is the war that Antichrist takes credit for as winning and creates his counterfeit Armageddon and his counterfeit credentials to come back as Jesus does at the real Armageddon. But this happens just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, as you roll out a chronology of Revelation in order, ending in with a summary in Revelation 14 of the last 3.5 years, and a little bit of summary in Revelation 15, and then you get the details of that summary between Revelation 16 and 19, culminating with Armageddon. In fact, you get Armageddon talked about in Revelation 16, and then you get the details of it in Revelation 19. And so this is the counterfeit Armageddon, that Antichrist will come in and promise peace and safety at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And so we get the same timing as the abomination that's talked about in Daniel and Mark 13, Matthew 24, the book of Luke, also with Antichrist crowning himself in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 in the temple. And as Daniel 11 talks about, we get him creating this new religion and the worship of a new God. When he does that, that is going to replace the Babylon religion that was there before. And I know we've kind of jumped ahead on some chronology there, but I just wanted to give some detail around for where Pike, and I don't depend on Pike for his expertise. I only note from my own research what the timing is of Joel 1 and 2, Revelation 9, and the Ezekiel 38 to 39 war is. And we know in Ezekiel 38 that that's in the end time. This is a different war that's it than is at the end of the millennium. And we get told in Ezekiel 39 that after this Gog war, you're going to have the second Exodus, which is a second half of the last 7 years event that Jesus is going to lead after he's come for rapture.
Yeah, so fascinating when you're able to line it up as you so very well in your research have done. Also, Gary, you normally put together documents to aid people in your, very in-depth research and study. Do you have, stuff that people can write to you about to get, further elaboration on the themes that we are discussing this evening?
Yes, I have a lot of documents on the things I talk about. I don't have documents necessarily on everything, but if somebody is wanting a document on, the end times with, about the last 7 years, I've got lots of documents on that. I've got the Gog War and the Joel 1 and 2 and the Revelation 9 war in several documents that link into it, so I can specifically send those ones and show you and tell you where to look in those documents to find it. So yeah, just get a hold of me if people are wanting some information on what I was talking about. If I've got a document on it, I will send it to you. I do not charge for this. In fact, I just like to get the information out there.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're so willing to share your research in that manner and to be kind to others in having done the homework, because you have extensively researched these topics, and so yeah, we greatly appreciate you doing so. Also, with regard to some of this work and research, you are posting on Facebook. You have your the group, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Group, and are there other places also that people can go to follow your work on your website, Genesis 6 Conspiracy? Other places?
Just at this point in time, just on my timeline and in the group, and I'm just getting back more into social media now, and I've been so busy with some family situations over the last year, and with writing the book, that I've narrowed things down. But I'm going to be becoming a lot more active again on social media.
Okay, brother. Hold on, everybody. We'll be right back for a second now.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Check out swpcalendar.com to see when to join us next for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain. Exalt the voice to them. Beckon with the hand. Open the gates, ye rulers. I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. A voice of many nations on the mountains, even like to that of many nations, a voice of kings and nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts has given command to a warlike nation to come from a land afar off, from the utmost foundation of heaven. The Lord and his warriors are coming to destroy all the world. That's Brenton's Septuagint translation of Isaiah chapter 13, verses 1 through 6. Care to comment?
Well, as we were talking about, we need to be prepared for the days to be like the days of Noah. And
Yes.
whether or not it's being talked about in terms of, the angels before the flood interacting, and again, as they did shortly after the flood with humans. I think we're going to see that. Not all the angels are in the abyss. We know that offspring of giants or offspring of angels, which were giants, showed up after the flood and were there before the flood. They're called the terrible ones in a lot of passages, like Isaiah and Ezekiel. And these are the terrible ones and the strong ones, as in Isaiah 25. These are talking about that bloodline, the branch of the terrible ones. Mm-hmm. And so I think we can expect the bloodlines, and we should be also open to the idea, not shocked if there's a third incursion, because I tend to fall into a second incursion. I recognize there's other possibilities for giants that show up after the flood, but I'll call it third incursion for sake of consistency in terms of what I generally tend to talk about, of giants in the end time. And that angels will be interacting with us in the end time. Now, we may not be told that they're angels, and I think we're being well prepared for that. But if they're going to reproduce giants, or there are giants that somehow survive into this period, they're going to be noticeable. And we need to be prepared for these types of things. And when I talk about we can't imagine what's going to happen, it's really hard to understand what all of this interaction with these types of beings that are certainly possible, that we need to be prepared for that. And in Daniel 2, at the end of the metallic prophecies, we have beings that are seemingly a separate kind of being in a race that are coming out of the metallic empires that are going to mix their seed with humankind. So whether or not this is talking about angelic mixing with humankind, with the seed of humankind, or this is some sort of spiritual possession, so to speak, that is going on, because you could take that back to Hebrew and understand it both ways. Something strange is going to be going on. And in Ezekiel, where the terrible ones are talked about, in Ezekiel 32, they're said to be in the prisons along the sides of the abyss. These are the demon spirits of the worst of the terrible ones who are slain on the earth, who are talking to Pharaoh in this prophecy. And what's going on here is that we need to understand that you've got demons that are in the abyss and demons that are outside the abyss. This is Jesus dealt with these demons that are called devils and evil spirits in the New Testament. And devils goes back to daemon as opposed to diablos, that when Satan is described as the devil, that goes back to diablos, not daemon. So there's two different words and two different meanings, and Satan is the prince of the demons. So the answer to him. And so you could have a possession that's going on. And they may invite them in, but it's still going to be somebody sharing a host body, or you could have these beings that are in some sort of clone body or some other transhumanism type of body prepared as an oikotarian for them. So we need to understand that things are going to get even crazier than where we are today. And we also want to talk a little bit, I think, about Babylon and how that fits in to what is going to be happening. And, Babylon, you can't just sort of understand it in limited terms. You got to understand all of the applications and the implications of the words that are talked about Babylon, particularly in Revelation, in the book of Revelation. So, Babylon is, first of all, told to be a city 9 times in Revelation 14, 17, and 18. So we know it's going to be a city. We know
Hey, Gary.
it is. Yep.
Real quick, before we move from this subject, wanted to ask you one other thing. And you can, of course, make it short and quick. But I just wanted to ask you about the American military coming out and being forced to disclose the supernatural nature of these USOs and how the aircraft carriers and the entire column of these Navy battleships were witness to this extraordinary unprecedented, and how as far as UFOs, USOs, whatever you want to call them, and how Congress now has been in meetings where they're being updated on this kind of weirdness and the supernatural weirdness that we're going to see, with the whole thing of as in the days of Noah. And then we can move into the Babylon. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, we're in the preparation period, right? So they're now recognizing that there are these UFOs. And the thing that we need to keep in mind, just as the catastrophes, whatever they say it is, it's not exactly the truth. So the catastrophes aren't being caused by what they're saying they are. They may be going on, but they're not from what they say they are until they're ready to make explicit predictions and take credit for it. With the UFOs, you have the same type of thing going on. So you're going to have these beings that are going to be here just as they were before the flood. And I think probably again after the flood. And if so, then they recreated those beings or they survived into it. And that includes all sorts of things that were going on in terms of types of beings, not just the Nephilim, but I mean, polytheism is just filled with all of these creatures that they created, including things like the elementals. And the elementals were like the fairy people with 3 different classifications, and one flew flying machines and are part of the fairy lore of kidnapping, and the one group is called the Greys in the gnome classification, and the ugly ones that, if you didn't know, was if you read a description about that type of abduction, you think it was a gray alien abduction. Mm-hmm. And so I think we might see some of those. And then the 4th category is the salamanders of the elementals, which are taller and are serpentine type of beings. So either some sort of surviving Nakash or some other type of serpentine being that is part of the hierarchy that the Bible talks about in terms of rudiments and elementals in the New Testament that are at the bottom level with the order of the angelic structure above. So they need to have all of these beings that are going to be coming back and interacting with us. They need to have the story, right? They need to make them acceptable to a modern, technologically advanced society that they're trying to get us up to speed on very quickly by giving us added knowledge. So this is part of the deception, that we're going to be making the stand, and it's like this in all of their entertainment, against the evil God of the universe, which is the God of the Bible. Doesn't matter whether or not it's in Star Wars or it's in Doctor Strange. It's all the same story, that they want to have this war to win their own realm, to live separate from God. So they have to come up with all of this history and a story, a narrative as to justifying who these people are, but they won't tell us exactly who they are because they want to deceive us. Yeah. And so we need to be prepared for these kinds of things, and it's going to speed up as we go. If we think the propaganda and the censorship has been overwhelming. So far, we've seen nothing as to what's
Right.
coming. These are just opening gambits, opening birth pangs. And so mix into all of this because, Babylon is the home of these demons, these
Right.
devils, right? As you read into the allegory, right? Just as you're reading out of Isaiah 13, and you could put Isaiah 34 in there as well.
Mhm.
So we need to be understanding that these are end time prophecies that are being talked about in the book of Isaiah as well. One for Armageddon and one for the time of Babylon. And so as we understand Babylon, we're talking about it. It has many aspects to it. So it's said to be a city. So we know it's going to be centered in a city. We know that this is a mystery religion, just as we get mystery described with her in Revelation 17:7 and 5, and that's the Greek word mysterion, which basically means hidden things and secrets, and a mystical religion that has initiates. This is the typical mystical polytheism that's around the world, and they're going to bring all of the religions under this umbrella of this mystical religion as a daughter of Babylon. And the woman is riding the empire of the end time, just as it was that mystical religion that were on all of the beast empires. And so all of the allegory, whether or not it's the mother of harlots or the woman or the abominations, this is all describing the mystical religions that were the organizational structure part to the beast empires, and understand that she's going to sponsor and control the end time empire as she rides the beast of empires, the seven empires. And you can understand sort of who those seven empires are in two ways. It just adds to it. You've got the main one that people would understand as empires that are directly related to Israel's development in history. So that includes Egypt, where Israel was raised into a teenager, as I would put it, in terms of a nation. You've got Assyria that took the northern tribes away and scattered them to the four corners of the earth and into lost history until the end time. You've got Babylon that is going to exile Judah. You've got Persia that's going to release Judah. You've got Rome, for example, that is going to disperse Judah again to around the world in this case, and is still to this, and this is the rising empire of the end time. So this mystical religion was all part of it, as part of that organizational structure. Babylon is going to be a political empire because she's going to be the one that controls the 10 kings. In fact, so much so they're going to partner with Antichrist to overthrow her because they grow jealous. And that's when Antichrist comes to power and establishes a new religion and a new god for people to worship, because they're going to destroy Babylon, as Revelation 17 talks about, shortly after the midpoint of the last 7 years, shortly after the abomination. And she's going to grow rich from all the princes and all the merchants around the world. So it's going to be this business operation too that I expect will probably take a tribute from all of these business transactions, that everything's done on, we don't have the system yet, but we're developing it of all electronic transfer. On every electronic transfer transaction, Babylon will take a tribute and grows rich. And what's interesting, though, so that we understand the complete aspect of how powerful this entity is that's going to be destroyed, won't last that long, probably the 3.5 years to start the last 7 years, and probably at least 3 years before that, as Revelation 2:9 will talk about 10 days or 10 years of tribulation, and days as in the week of years in Daniel 9:27, and other passages is a year in prophecy. And all of those allegories match up perfectly, and rewording of what years are, whether or not it's times, days, years, number of days used in both Daniel and Revelation, they match up perfectly. So Babylon's going to be rising, and that's where the false prophets that I talked about earlier. But here's where I want to bring it back to in terms of what we were talking about in the birth pangs. In Revelation 18:23, it says that Babylon deceives the nations. I think the exact words is for by the sorceries were all the nations deceived. And we need to understand that size of that deception with that power that she has. But we need to understand, what do they mean by that word sorceries? And sorceries is translated about 4 or 5 times in the book of Revelation back to 3 words. All of them are connected to each other. They are G5331, 5332, 5333. And the words are pharmakia, pharmakus, and pharmakos. And so when we understand what this means in the ancient sort of Greek, that was a charm and a spell, which is why it's translated as such in some of the English translations. But it was also understood as a chemical potion and a treatment. And it was prepared by a sorcerer or a priest or a scientist of the 7 sciences that the mystical religions come out of. And so when we look at that word pharmakia and the other 2 words, pharmakus and pharmakos, is that's the root word as we would understand pharmacy today. And of course, that whether or not we're talking about drugs that are illegal as in opioids that seem to have been also developed by the pharmaceutical companies, or it's your day-to-day prescription medicines, or anything that medicates you and gives you protection from diseases as an extension thereof.
Or so-called protection.
Or so-called protection is seemingly very much connected to how Babylon deceives the world.
Yes.
And we need to understand that. Which is interesting,
because, with what you are bringing up here, it seems to me that, again, the agenda is tied into the declaration on the Georgia Guidestones, and that especially there's, this push now amongst the nations to mandate the snake bite.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at, the medical association, it has all of these serpentine imageries that are either a single serpent or a dual serpent. And as you take the medical history back into its history, they take the knowledge of the medicine which comes out of the 7 sacred sciences that we know as the 7 liberal arts today. They take that back to a Roman god and a Greek god named Asclepius, and some people pronounce it Asclepius. And he was the father and the god of medicine. And he had a son named Hippocrates, who, which is the Hippocratic oath that all doctors take. And, this was the cult of the snake. This was all of their imagery has, whether or not it's the WHO organization around the world, they all have a form of serpentine sort of imagery. And even the pharmaceutical association, they have 2 symbols. One that some people might be familiar with are the mortar and the pestle, but the older one, and which is still used in most countries around the world, is the bowl of Hygeia. Who Hygeia is the brother of Hippocrates, the son of the daughter of Asclepius. And that is an image of a cup or a chalice or a grail or a bowl that has a snake that's wrapped around it with its head on top. And it's important to understand that sort of snake imagery as we take that back into places like Heliopolis, home of the therapeutic, where the term therapeutic drugs come from, right? The history of it dates back to that and to the seven sciences, in that the Egyptian magi were called sorcerers and enchanters and practitioners of witchcraft, spells, or magic, which is basically the sciences of chemistry and medicine. And what we look at when we look at history in terms of the serpent is that many gods were described as a serpent, and particularly ones that are related to the medical history. So you have this history of serpentine gods that we would know as seraphim angels, right? We would know them as the Uraeus out of Egypt. That when you see images of that sort of golden or shiny winged serpent that's in a lot of Egyptian history, that's the Uraeus. These were gods like Osiris and Isis after the flood, or some of the parent gods before the flood, because the serpentine gods were the most common of the gods, just as Zeus was described initially as a serpentine god, just as Anki and Enlil were described in the Sumerian pantheon as serpent gods, and Tiamat in the parent gods before the flood, who was the creator of these scorpion beings, by the way, which they call the Gerdabalu and the Akrababalu. And note that a crab is the Hebrew word for scorpion. So there's a connection there that she created these beings that could destroy the world, very much as the same description as what comes out of Revelation 9. And I have a document on that if people want that. And so you have like the Nagas in India, you have the dragon gods, just as seraphim were dragons and serpents were known as dragons or serpents in prehistory as being essentially the same being. And that's why you have Satan also described as a serpent and a dragon in Revelation 12, and the devil. And so you have, let's say in the Quiché Maya, you have Quetzalcoatl, and all through Central America, you have the plumed serpent and the feathered serpent gods. These are the gods that were supplying this illicit knowledge as seraphim watchers were described around the world in all cultures. And we even have the term watcher in the Bible 4 times in the book of Daniel, which come from the throne of God, where the seraphim are located and are acting as sort of ministers of God and taking messages of government and rule even down to the earth in Daniel's time. So you have loyal seraphim angels, and you have rebellious seraphim angels. So it's when you look at that imagery of all the medical associations that have that serpentine imagery that goes back to the pantheon of gods, and you understand that it's this mystical Enochian mysticism, that Enoch created mysticism from the 7 sacred sciences, the knowledge cult that then merged with the illicit knowledge from angels that allowed the world in the days of Noah to be, I think, beyond what we have today, and we're still catching up to that. So much so that the whole world and all of the earth was corrupt. And the earth is the land, and that's the Hebrew word shakath, which means destroy, ruin, decay, words like that. So all of the plant genomes, all for the most part of the animal DNA, human DNA was corrupted before the flood with the technology and interaction from the fallen angels that we're just now sort of catching up to. And that's why I think God called all of the animals to the ark and selected the 8 that would survive, because he knew the representatives of each species whose DNA wasn't decayed, wasn't manipulated. And same with the 8 that went on the ark to start the world anew, that would give the world a second chance. Not that God wasn't aware that fallen angels weren't done with their intentions to enslave humankind and prevent them from being taken into eternity as equals or higher to God, or higher to the gods, the fallen angels. They were trying to destroy humankind and make sure that they were never going to reach their destiny. Right. And so we need to understand the days of Noah, and we need to understand the language of Babylon and how they work together with those birth pangs. So as things get...
Hold on, Gary. We'll be right back for final segment, everybody.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for a final segment. This show has really went by very quickly. As always, when we get together, Brother Gary, you've got a lot of incredible information to bring forth. And so, with regard to the serpent, we see that this dragon class, this feathered serpent, this plumed dragon, this pinion dragon, we see it's also connected to the serpent that beguiled Eve in Genesis chapter 3. And that it is said in the Apocalypse of Moses and also the Apocalypse of Abraham that this was a winged serpent, the guardian of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so I believe that we are tying together that these bloodlines are connected to even the what is said as Samael, the angel of death, the viper of God, and that all of the stories of the dragon lords coming down out of the heavens and that seeding culture and civilization around the world, that it shows that, in my opinion, they were here even before we were, and they are posing, parading themselves as if they are gods when they are nothing more than the angels which rebelled against the Most High and were cast out of the heavens. Jerry?
Yes, and in Jewish mysticism, Samael is Satan in his seraphic form.
Mm-hmm, right.
And the fallen angels are the ones that are providing the knowledge, right? That essentially provided for civilization and technology that was added to the knowledge, that God had taught Adam in Eden. And then, of course, pile on top of that now the knowledge of good and evil that was taken out of Eden as well. Knowledge isn't necessarily bad. It's how it's used, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
It can always be used for good and it can always be used for evil. The problem is with government of any human form is anytime you give government, concede them anything in terms of your rights or their development of knowledge, they will always use it for evil, and they will always abuse the knowledge and the power that they have. It's just a matter of when. And I also look at that dual serpent image that's on the imagery of a lot of medical organizations, and that's a perfect sort of artistic imagery of DNA. And
yes,
so,
and the caduceus.
yes, and it shows to me that knowledge was understood before the flood, just as we learned it in this generation, which again demonstrates that nothing is new under the sun, and that they manipulated that DNA just in ways that we're just now learning and being able to do ourselves. That word chimera comes out of Greek mythology for these creations of these beings that have multiple species attached to their beings. And just like King Abada of the Cedar Forest was a chimera type of creature with all of his different parts that are described in that epic of him. So we are sort of in those days of Noah again, but we're going to a level of advanced technology that our minds cannot wrap we cannot physically wrap our minds around, and it's happening so fast. And so we're moving into the age of digital technology in multiple universes that can do all sorts of things. That is all the knowledge of the fallen angels. This is where this comes from. That's why it's accelerating so fast, just as it accelerated the antediluvian world into destruction in very short order after the creation of the Nephilim. And I remember listening to this, the reports coming out of Davos, and I think the year was 2017. And they were talking about these advanced technologies that were merging AI and quantum computing, and how they were going to be able to mix everything from monitoring and medicating human beings with, and to business transactions and access to knowledge. And of course, with this implant, as it would be inserted, would be connected to this, I guess, almost like this Borg mind of knowledge, that everything could be done digitally to give you some form of immortality.
Yeah.
And when we start to hear of technology that has not only the ability to manipulate DNA, but to message and communicate thereby with DNA digitally, we're essentially breaking into that realm of what they were talking about. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, because they're actually trying to get to a point where they can do things below the DNA level, at the below the atom level, with nanobots and biobots for, biobots for 3D printing to make DNA at the atomic level. So they have this ability that if there is this ability to communicate with your body at a message level, that basically the whole universe is made up of information, that it can actually communicate. They can change your whole DNA from the atom level upward. So, so trying to protect yourself against what could be abused is something we need to be aware of. And so it doesn't matter what we're being sold, why we should be doing certain things or not. We have to ask the hard critical questions. What is what they're trying to do, or what would they like me to do? Is that going to change me in any way? And I don't think we're in the level of that they're able to do that yet, but the technology is developing that soon they will be able to, and we're seeing the birthing of that through one of the birth pangs today in the pestilence.
Yes. I agree. And I think also, because a lot of people ask, well, is, the snake bite, is that the mark of the beast? But I think that there's going to be a progression of levels. And as you mentioned, that there's going to be an incorporation with the nanotechnology, a changing of DNA, and also that the AI technology incorporated into all of this, that this then could get to the point of tracking and tracing and controlling even that which you buy and sell. And that, it's further down the line, but yes, we are seeing the beginnings of all of this as it is being unveiled.
And because that cryptocurrency fits in perfectly with that whole concept. It's just underline what you were saying.
Right. Yeah, because it's all, digital. Everything is digital. The tracking, the tracing, the behaviors, the way that even with Alexa and everybody's homes, how they are monitoring and compiling data on all of the people of the world. It reminds me, I just recently, and I don't usually watch a lot of TV or shows or anything, but I did watch this third series of this show called Hannah, and this particular show was talking about the establishment, how a rogue part of the CIA, they were training all these young, talented people to become assassins. And then they had this algorithm, this program, to where they were monitoring all the people around the world. And according to their behavior and the data they collected, they were targeting divergents, those that would become dissidents. And like the Minority Report, they had decided to kill these kind of people early in their life before they became radicals, revolutionaries, speaking out against the Orwellian system and leading people, leading movements, like the Martin Luther King types that had an ability to inspire people to rise up against government and tyranny. And it was just fascinating to me that, this whole show was depicting and releasing that this kind of thing was what government was really up to. And so very interesting, especially, according to what we're talking about, and how it seems to be all connected.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, when you use the word program, because that's what the bots really are. It's a program that's a union of AI and quantum computing that would be able to do that, right? And connect it into, a sort of a larger sort of bank that I think is the Atma particle that they're searching for, which comes out of the Upanishads and the Vedas, which is a particle that is invisible, that merges with visible particles, but it contains the knowledge of the universe, or the information that is exchanged instantaneously throughout the universe, continually through quantum entanglement. And that's why you need AI and quantum computing working together, so that they can find that particle that's going to be part of this digital super system that is that is coming. So yeah, interesting how all of that is sort of out there. And another thing that's coming out of what we're seeing today is debt. Debt in ways that we've not seen before, and which is connected to the end times, because you're going to have to reinvent the whole beast system in terms of, and the best way to do that is with the global reset that they like to talk about, which the current president is very fond of, as is the Prime Minister of Canada. And both are racking up unprecedented debt. And because they want to bankrupt the West, they want to bring the powerful down so that they can have a more equal world, so they can have, like China was under communism, where it's the most equal situation in the world because everybody's dirt poor except for the oligarchs who are running things. And in the global reset, they're going to be looking to wipe out all visible wealth to pay for the debt. And then they're going to remove all personal debt in exchange that you're not going to be able to have any assets. You won't be able to own your home. You won't be able to own any land. Everything's going to be owned by the government. And they have planned for this, and you're going to like this if you haven't heard it, a jubilee year when all debts are forgiven. So they're going to have governments and people all addicted to the debt that they have, and then have this great religious type of jubilee, which starts to sort of mesh into that religious aspect of Babylon that we're talking about. It was a 50 year of canceling debts, or it was also done in the Assyrian Empire as a known thing to do, so that they could start over. But the exchange is the only people that are going to own anything are the oligarchs and the government. And so everybody else won't have anything. So it's a super social program that they want to do it by destroying capitalism as we will have it. They only want business run by the oligarchs of the elite, the bloodlines, and the immediate family, and this minimal level of free enterprise of mom and pop shops, so that they have no power. It's the old feudal system, right? And if you look again, what is some of the things that we saw coming out of this last catastrophe, this birth pang that we were talking about, is that all of the corporations run by and owned by the oligarchs around the world grew rich. Everybody else grew poor. So it's all working towards their end to cattle herd us through catastrophe into the open arms of the globalists. And they have in the global reset 7 points that they consider are sort of the main things. And I would say 8, just as you have 7 gods of the wandering stars and within the pantheon, and then you have the 8th, which is Satan, on top. So watch for those types of commonalities in the numbers. But the first one is environmental sustainability. So they want green socialism everywhere that transcends all national boundaries. They want to have fairer equitable economies, which means socialism, and oligopolies running it, just as the Nazis had set up. It was a national socialist government that you had these rich, powerful families working with an Antichrist archetype type figure to control everything and then to start genocide. And it was called Holocaust in the U.S. because it was against the people of Judah. But genocide is coming in the end time, and we get several accounts of that in the Bible. So it's the third point is all technology for good. In other words, for socially equitable purposes and in control by the oligopolies and the government. The fourth one is the reskilling of workers for future work. That is never really described. In other words, servitude and enslavement for the powerful, because they want to wipe out the middle class. And of course, everything that the movement does is killing the middle class. And if you look at one of the parties that is in the US today, and they have similar parties around the world, they are the party of the wealthy and the absolute poor. They want to wipe the middle class out, and along with it, free speech. Fifth one is better business, woke business. And we've seen that rise in absolutely astounding nature to see all of these left-wing fascists controlling all of the corporations for the most part, coming out of nowhere and implementing the policy. It's absolutely astounding. And that this is going to, be completely sort of guided by the DIE anachronism, which is a diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So it's designed to, kill the order that we have and go back to the old order of the Nephilim and the Rephaim and the beast kingdoms. Right. And they want fair access to all is the sixth point, which means equity but not equality, and the end of meritocracy, complete socialism. Mm-hmm. And the seventh one is they want to go beyond geopolitics, end of borders, end of nationalism, world government. And they look at all catastrophes are opportunities to make this happen. So the best way to speed it up is to have contrived catastrophes. It all starts to make sense when you look at it. And the eighth one, which is kind of interesting from the religious perspective, is they want one standard knowledge cult belief system, which is the mystery religion of old, that worked in harmony, as they saw it, with the development of knowledge and religion. They were copacetic. So you're going to start to see, you're already seeing the product of the mystical governance of science. You're going to see it come out as a full-form partnership not that far down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings me to one of the paragraphs I didn't read in the Albert Pike. It says, meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. And I mean, we see it even right now on this whole thing of mandating the snakebite, that the people are in the streets of all these countries. It's not being reported here in the United States at all, but the populations are rioting over, their right to choice being taken away. And I think, this is an issue that must be stood upon, because this is the sand in the line. They get away with this, they can force, people to do whatever they want. Then it's just a crazy time. And we see the cataclysms and the social unrest and the upheavals and, the economic crisis and all of that playing out exactly as you said, Gary.
Yes, and and I think we're going to start to see in the next couple of years more significant outbreaks of war. and it's going to, I have a sort of an expression that we're starting to move into, and I think we've already moved into it. And I call it the post-constitutional and human right era, where we no longer have rights, and anything that was guaranteed before, as proven in many countries, and Canada in particular, and Australia, is what we're seeing. We don't have quite the same constitution that the U.S. has. But we've been basically told we don't have rights, we have privileges, and as a privilege, we can do what we want to do. So you're going to see the Constitution used in ways that you haven't thought about before, or most people haven't thought about before, that is designed, and we're starting to see it in the U.S. even, because it was created to do so, to persecute those who resist the coming globalist state, and in particular Christians.
Absolutely, we are the enemy. Ever since the implementation of the Patriot Act without it ever being read, the Defense Authorization Act, all of that, the Black Ops side, the military tribunal system, the creation of the domestic terrorists and how they can label anybody a divergent, and especially targeting patriots and Christians. Certainly you're no longer innocent until proven guilty, but guilty until proven innocent. And so things are upside down, and we're definitely not under a constitutional system as we still like to believe.
These are the seeds of genocide.
Yes, unfortunately.
And creating a class that
Right.
you will want to make disappear from the face of the earth.
Right. In regard to where you are in Canada, how are things? I mean, there's unrest, of course, everywhere in the world, but do you see any place as, somewhere of safety? Or like us, we believe that, the Most High, of course, can protect his own wherever you may be, but how do you feel about that? Because I know people ask about cities of refuge or places of refuge all the time.
Increasingly, as we see technology advance, this thought that you might be able to hide in the mountains or
outrun.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is advancing so quickly as you can't hide anywhere in the earth, and they'll track you down. And we can try, and we can try and delay things, but at the end of the day, the reach is everywhere. And I think that sort of goes to what it says in Revelation 13, that that they will cause, and this is at the ultimate implementation, obviously, that even those who don't take the mark of the beast, they're going to be killed. How are they going to know where they are? Because you can't hide. So, and the instructions at that point in time is for the patience of the saints, because if you're to be taken to prison, you're to go to prison, and if you're going to be killed, you're going to be killed. We're not there yet. We ought to be standing up, and we ought to be preparing, but understand that we're going to be we're going to be persecuted. We're going to be enslaved. We're going to be put in concentration camps. We'll be treated like the January 6th people, who weren't charged and have been in solitary confinement since probably late January, early February, and they were stormed by SWAT teams and shackled and cuffed, and basically the only charges they're laying against anybody is an advanced form of trespassing and parading illegally. But as with Chewbacca Man, the guy with the Viking hat, you can get 4.5 years for just wanting to go in there and do a prayer and sing a song for the health of the country. I'm not saying he ought to have been there. What I'm saying is we are now beyond constitutional and human rights, and I doubt whether there's going to be a hard enough push that's going to stop it. We may slow it down, but the forces of the left, the forces of globalism, the forces of the spurious ones are everywhere, and we see it in the corporations. And you saw, a classic example with the election laws in Georgia last year with the oligarchical part. Many of the corporations, one that centered there, got on board. They are not free enterprise. If anybody ever thought a corporation was free enterprise, it is not. It never has been. I come out of the corporate world. It is a perversion of free enterprise.
Hey, brother, we appreciate you as usual. We'll have to do it again soon, Gary. God bless you, man. We appreciate you. God bless everybody. Good night. Shalom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.